Hello and welcome to today's edition of the Listening Lounge. My name is Nick Day and I'm CEO of JGA Recruitment Group, and we're specialist payroll and HR recruiters. Now, they say the quieter we are, the more we hear, and that listening is the secret to discovering the greatest of stories. So sit back, relax, and enjoy today's fantastic guest. I'm joined by Chris Eastwood, the co-founder and co-CEO of Penfold. Now, Chris founded Penfold to bridge the gap and improve the lack of support that companies have in offering proper pension programs and financial literacy to their employees. Now, I know a little bit about your background story through my research, Chris. However, to enlighten our listeners, I wonder if you could bring them up to speed on why you're so passionate about pensions, your background, and why, I guess, in particular, you're on a mission to enable everyone to save towards what you'd call a worry-free retirement.
My history with pensions, I suppose, goes back to my first job, which was at Deloitte, where I was training to be an accountant. So this was after a degree in maths. So you might say I'm a bit of a numbers geek. And I was reading an interesting article around compound interest, which had an example that was really, really compelling to me at the time, where, which I'll just, I'll give that example now, where if you save a certain amount of money each month from the age of 20 to 30 for 10 years, you might end up with more at retirement at age 70 than if you save that same amount of money for 40 years from 30 to 70. And so saving 4 times as much gets you the same end result if you start a bit later. And so, after checking the maths, obviously, I just found that really compelling. And that led me to be that annoying person that went to nag all of their friends to start saving into a pension as much as they feel comfortable with from an early point as possible. But I think at the same time, I saw how difficult all the different pension platforms out there were to use, the ones that I had used, the ones that my friends were using, and how every interaction, unfortunately, with those pension companies and pension providers leads to some sort of frustration. So difficult to log in or open a pension, difficult to understand how much is being paid in, how much they should be paying in, choose where that money is invested, move that pension from one provider to another when you move jobs. The list goes on. And I think, customer support, trying to get through to someone when you don't understand something, all of that stuff is difficult with an industry that unfortunately hasn't quite kept up with the progress of technology over the last 10, 20 years. So, those two examples really summarize for me the big problem that we have in the pension savings market, where number one, people don't understand the powerful benefits of saving for later life through compound interest, yes, or the tax relief that's available. So this sort of lack of education and lack of understanding on one half, and on the other half, it's incredibly frustrating and painful to deal with pension companies, which means that people put off doing it until it's too late. So those two problems lead to this big societal issue that ultimately people aren't saving anywhere near enough to be able to support themselves when they want to stop work. According to the Pension and Lifetime Savings Association, the PLSA, 79% of the UK population is not on track for a comfortable retirement. Department for Work and Pensions also has a stat that 62% of people over 40 expect to work well into their sort of beyond their retirement age. And look, that's a problem that we want to solve. So, after moving through a couple more jobs in my career and seeing this problem for a few more years, I went for a beer with an ex-colleague of mine from Deloitte and got talking about pensions, where, Pete Hyken, had set up the workplace pension at his employer and seen quite how difficult that was as an employer to set it up, but more importantly, how little any of the staff really engaged with that benefit, and consequently the bad financial decisions that they ended up making. And we could see a better way in our minds to use modern technology to help educate people and help people understand the pensions, but also make all of those touch points with a pension much, much easier and remove all that frustration, and thereby help people really engage with their pensions. So after that evening, we sent an email to each other the next day saying, you know what, we should do this thing, and jumped in to try and save the world of pensions.
around the world of pensions education, I mean, I know as a business owner here, I get very little literature through to me, and you have to go and find the information. It's very rare that you see something coming to you that explains anything around the world of pensions, which I think is surprising. So clearly there's a gap there that and more needs to be done around pensions education from the government or whoever the powers may be. But I don't know the stats, you may know it, but you mentioned there about the difficulty in moving a pension. Now, I work in the world of recruitment, so I know firsthand how often people change jobs and the complexities around trying to locate a pension or shift a pension. And if my understanding is correct, there's a significant sum, I won't even pretend to know the numbers, of pensions that actually exist that people can't even find or access, that are just sat there waiting for people to sort of claim they started saving, they've lost track of who it was with, they've moved on to another provider and almost have to start again. So that also tells me that there's a real issue here, because people are trying to save and sometimes lose the money that they've even started saving. I don't know if you know the numbers around that.
£20 billion, and I think it's, which is a shocking number, and actually I think has increased now. I saw a stat recently, it may even be £28 billion. Pension pots that have, as you say, the details have been lost because the platforms are hard to use. The paperwork is either lost or impenetrable, and so people move 3 or 4 jobs throughout their career, and there's a couple pension pots sitting there from 5 or 10 years ago that are forgotten about. And so that's a huge amount of money. You know, you put that in the context of cost of living crisis and everything this day and age. So it's a huge problem, and I think it leads to this. It stems from this thing that sometimes people don't view this pension as their own money, and that's entirely due to this sort of opaqueness of the industry and the lack of visibility of pensions, purely through it being a number on a piece of paper you get once a year. People don't associate it with, this is a savings pot for you that you own just like any other, and so I'm sure people wouldn't be leaving ISA balances lying around and losing quite as much as they do with the pensions, but unfortunately it happens.
So look, if we link this to the world of payroll, which is something that I'm fully immersed in and understand, we see the world of payroll evolve pretty quickly. It adapts to change pretty quickly. It's at the moment, we've seen technology companies in particular from Silicon Valley and beyond suddenly see the payroll space as something that should be invested in. It's ripe for transformation. It's ripe for automation. It's ripe for innovation. Right? And we're seeing the payroll industry move very quickly recently, particularly post-pandemic. And we've seen new career pathways open up and people have to update their skills and so on and so forth. However, and my experience is limited, so please bring me up to speed. But from what I've experienced so far and in what I've seen in the market, I haven't seen the same level of innovation, development, advancement, evolution even in the world of pensions. I feel like pensions is almost falling further and further behind. We're still living in the chit-chat of auto enrollment being a relatively new thing, which of course it isn't anymore because there's a lack of understanding. So, I mean, maybe I'm incorrect. It's not an industry I'm as immersed in as I am in the world of payroll, but I wonder if you could, if my assumption is correct, and if it is, why it is being left further and further behind.
Your assumption is bang on, and I think this stems to the point I was making around the frustrating user experience around pensions, is that the world of pensions has been underinvested from a technology point of view for a long time. And I think auto enrollment, when it came in, was a fantastic piece of legislation that has got so many more people saving into a pension. But really, the providers that launched at that time were helping businesses comply with the new regulations that were coming in. So really, it was all about getting the staging dates right, making sure that the contribution levels were okay, making sure that these new obligations that an employer had to satisfy were being satisfied.
So it was compliance led from a business, not employee savings, well-being led.
And that's the missed opportunity. And I think because there was such a boom in the number of companies that were launching a pension scheme due to auto enrollment, there was a lot of business and a lot of work that had to be done to keep up with that scale of growth from an employer compliance perspective.
Yeah, makes sense.
That next wave of investing in the technology to improve the end user engagement hasn't yet happened. And quite frankly, the solutions that were built when auto enrollment came in are now quite old. And modern technology has the opportunity to make that experience even better for payroll professionals and employers.
Even for those that have enrolled into auto enrollment, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're saving anywhere near enough for their financial future. So to a certain degree, they either need to do something else, what makes the whole impact relatively redundant if it's not going to give you enough to secure your future anyway. So I'd love to, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? It's been successful in the sense that people have more pensions, but if it's not going to give you the vehicle to survive well enough in retirement, what's the point? It would be my question.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't dispute. I think it's been a fantastic thing, as I say, getting people started and raising awareness around pensions. But you're absolutely right, 8% isn't enough for most people. And the problem is that now, because that's a mandated level, people view that as an appropriate level, and so people think, well, government says 8%, therefore we'll save 8% and I'll be fine.
I trust them.
Unfortunately, yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And so more needs to be done. More needs to be done through education, potentially through policy. The other problem is that what came with that 8% is it doesn't always apply to people's total salary as well. So qualifying earnings is only a chunk of people's salary if it's above 45k, and so you might end up saving less than 8% on salary when arguably you need to be up to sort of the 12 or even 15% of your earnings level to be saving enough to generate a sufficient income in retirement. So yeah, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. It's definitely it's created some momentum with pension savings and a raised awareness, but it doesn't go far enough, and that's where we think pension providers can do more in educating and helping people, both employers and employees, understand what would be best for their staff.
Thank you for joining me on today's episode of The Listening Lounge. My name is Nick Day, and remember, every great conversation starts with great listening. Till next time.